The 60 Scoop. A brief overview of the issue. Aboriginal children were taken from their homes and families and placed with non-Indigenous white families. This resulted in a loss of cultural identity due to improper advisement from the government to the families who took in the children. A lawsuit was launched in 2009 based on the 1965 Canada-Ontario Welfare Services Agreement. An Ontario judge, Judge Edward Bilobaba's ruling concluded that the government is at fault, meaning that this is the first win in 8 years since the lawsuit launched. The government had a responsibility to consult the band and take action in preventing children from losing their Indigenous identity and cultural influences. Continued. This is similar to the past with Europeans coming over, taking the land, and enforcing their culture on the Indigenous communities. This deals with the idea that colonizers thought they were doing right by getting involved but end up causing more harm. The article exhibits how bad the government is still is dealing with Indigenous issues with the effort to shut down the case. The government is now finally willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to settle multiple class action lawsuits filed by the survivors of the 60s scoop. Background information. The who involved will be the Indigenous children ranging in ages. Some were babies where others were older children. More than 20,000 First Nations children were taken and adopted out from their homes and families. This took place within Canada, reaching from British Columbia all the way to Ontario. All of this occurred between the years of 1965 and 1984. This is because Canada wanted to take children and place them with non-Indigenous families to merge them into white culture to better adapt them. Over the years, there has been 18 related multiple lawsuits dealing with the 60 scoop. The main case started in 2009 based on the 1965 Canada-Ontario Welfare Services Agreement. In the fight, there were no real wins until February 2017 with Judge Bilobaba's ruling that the government was negligent. Over the years, the government has made a continuous effort to try and throw out the case to avoid admitting fault and taking blame. How it relates. The case and situation can be related to Canada's dark roots in colonialism. In the past, Canada has taken over Aboriginal people's traditions and land and claimed it for their own, as well as enforcing their own culture to replace the Indigenous culture already set in place. They've also taken children before and sent them to residential schools with harsh conditions and poor living arrangements. There were also continuously negative views towards Indigenous people held by white Canadians that resulted in discrimination in schools and other public places. The case still proves that there is a resistance from the government towards Indigenous communities and proves to the communities that the government still does not care as much for their issues as they do for others. The implications. The result of this horrific event ended up being a loss of cultural identity. The loss was detrimental to their psychological state and mental health. A direct quote from Gallant. The loss of Aboriginal identity resulted in psychiatric disorder, substance abuse, unemployment, violence, and numerous suicides. There was a loss of identity and language, as well as experiencing racism within the white communities. There was improper information given on how to ensure cultural identity is kept, and no steps were taken to prevent the missed opportunity to exercise the Aboriginal and treaty rights after placed in the new homes. Since the children and the adoptive families were not provided with the knowledge about the Aboriginal and treaty rights, they could not exercise them, meaning that there is a loss of federal benefits that they were entitled to as they grew older. Overall, this event led to cultural genocide by negatively impacting generations of Aboriginal peoples by taking their cultural identity.
If I saw the minister today, I would say, dear minister, you are still standing in the dark. You need to turn the lights on. You need to walk out of that darkness into a truth of Canadian history. '60 Scoop is the truth of Canadian history. Acknowledge it, embrace it, and say yes. We will walk together to heal this nation. This is the most beautiful country in the world. Turn the lights on.
Some background information on Chief Marcia Brown Martell. She was taken at the age of 4 while her mother had to stand and watch, afraid to reach out for her children due to the officials with the threats of gun use. She was sent to multiple foster homes and even spent some time homeless due to the improper placing. A quote from Chief Martell, "I've been fostered out so many places, and all it did was prove to me that nobody wanted me." The government's failed duties. The government's common law duty included an obligation to protect the Aboriginal children from losing their cultural identity, as well as giving them information on the Aboriginal and treaty rights. They failed to consult the bands on proper education for the non-Indigenous families, and if they had been consulted, prevention of loss of cultural identity could have been achieved and less issues may have been raised. The scenario ties to colonizers thinking they are doing the right thing by getting involved, but end up causing more harm by enforcing their culture on those who do not want it. Recent rulings. Judge Edward Bellababa's ruling concluded that the government is at fault, meaning that this is the first win in 8 years since the lawsuit was launched. He found that many of Canada's submissions to the case missed the point or did not have sufficient evidence standing behind it, resulting in more persuasion in favor of the Indigenous survivors. With the federal government, within the last month, the government is finally preparing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to settle multiple related lawsuits. Overall, these cases will cost the government between $550 to $800 million. This will include $50 million for reconciliation projects and helping victims recapture their identity, roughly $50,000 for each survivor, and a separate fund that will be created to go towards legal costs. And thank you for watching.